Hey everyone, my name's Ramal, welcome back to the channel, and in this video I'll be providing you with my reasoning as to why I think the 2019 iPad Air is a far better buy than the 2017 10.5-inch iPad Pro, especially in 2019 from a student's perspective. So let's get right into it. Right off the bat, I would like to point out that the 10.5-inch iPad Pro does have a few advantages over the 2019 iPad Air, but even though the numbers may be higher in a few certain areas, don't let the specs fool you, because specs aren't everything, especially when it comes to day-to-day usage and the overall experience of using the product. So here are the 5 main advantages that I think the 10.5-inch iPad Pro has over the 2019 iPad Air. The first advantage is the ProMotion 120Hz display on the iPad Pro versus the 60Hz display on the iPad Air, meaning that the iPad Pro has a higher refresh rate display than on the iPad Air. The second advantage is the 4GB of RAM on the iPad Pro versus the 3GB of RAM on the iPad Air. The fourth advantage that the 10.5-inch Pro has over the 2019 iPad Air is that it has a higher resolution rear camera at 12 megapixels as opposed to the 8 megapixels on the iPad Air. Both devices have the same front camera, so there's no worries in that aspect. And finally, the fifth advantage that I think that the older iPad Pro has over the newer iPad Air is that it has slightly better graphical capabilities than the iPad Air. So the older 10.5-inch iPad Pro does have a few advantages over the newer iPad Air, but don't let those numbers fool you because, as I said before, specs aren't everything. The main reason that I'm actually recommending the newer 2019 iPad Air over the older 10.5-inch iPad Pro mainly have to do with the A12 Bionic Chip that you can find in the 2019 iPad Air, as it beats out a few of the advantages that I listed that the iPad Pro 10.5-inch has over the iPad Air. So let's get into those. The A12 Bionic chip in the iPad Air is based on a faster and more efficient 7nm process compared to the 10nm process in the 10.5-inch iPad Pro. What this means is that the iPad Air is much better at allocating power usage depending on what task you're trying to do on the iPad, compared to the older iPad Pro. This means that you'll get better battery life and also better day-to-day performance when it comes to doing what you need to do. Secondly, the graphical advantage that the iPad Pro has over the iPad Air isn't noticeable at all when it comes to day-to-day usage, and the iPad Air can still run all the games and all the most powerful apps on the App Store without breaking a sweat. When it comes down to it, the newer iPad Air will most probably outperform the older iPad Pro just because of the fact that it has the newer chip, so there's nothing to worry about in terms of performance, even though the iPad Air does have the iPhone-specific A12 Bionic chip, whereas the older iPad Pro has the iPad-specific A10X Fusion chip. Fourthly, the 3GB of RAM in the iPad Air is fine, as iOS and iPadOS is very good at allocating RAM, and this won't have many noticeable real-world effects compared to the 4GB of RAM in the 10.5-inch iPad Pro. iOS, and more specifically iPadOS, are very good at allocating the correct amount of resources for any given task, so even though the newer 2019 iPad Air has less RAM than the 2017 10.5-inch iPad Pro, you won't really see any real differences in real day-to-day usage. But you may be thinking, the older 10.5-inch iPad Pro still has the better screen, as it can run at a higher refresh rate of 120Hz compared to the 60Hz on the iPad Air. Well, you're not wrong, but the fact is, the A10X Fusion chip powering the older iPad Pro is 2 generations behind the A12 chip in the iPad Air. And yes, that does mean that right now, the older 10.5-inch iPad Pro will have much more fluid animations and general swiping gestures than the newer iPad Air. But there is a catch. Since the A10X Fusion chip in the older iPad Pro is 2 years behind the A12 chip in the iPad Air, those fast and fluid animations won't last when it comes to future endurance. Now don't get me wrong, the older iPad Pro can still run iPadOS just fine, but the problems arise 2 or 3 years down the road when the A10X Fusion chip is severely outdated and the iPad Air still has a fairly recent A12 chip. And all of this isn't to say that the iPad Air has a highly inferior screen. No, that isn't the case at all, because even though it has a 60Hz refresh rate on the panel, it still has true tone and the same amount of color accuracy as the older 10.5-inch iPad Pro. And yes, the cameras. So the iPad Air does have an 8MP rear shooter compared to the 12MP on the iPad Pro, meaning that the iPad Air misses out on 4K recording and better image processing. But think about this for a second. Are you really going to be doing run and gun 4K video filming on your iPad? And if you are, you shouldn't be buying an iPad to do 4K video. That's not the right choice at all. The 8MP rear shooter on the 2019 iPad Air is still perfectly serviceable when it comes to your general needs of an iPad camera, such as scanning documents and taking quick photos and videos of lectures and classes or what have you. But when it comes to the front camera on both iPads, they both have the same high quality 7MP FaceTime camera, meaning that all video calls and anything you need to do with the front camera on the iPad will be perfectly fine, even on the 2019 iPad Air. And in my opinion, I think that the front camera is the more important camera on an iPad, as it makes for really high quality video calling and things like that. Also, I'm not going to ignore the fact that the 4 speakers on the older 10.5-inch iPad Pro are better than the 2 speakers that you find on the 2019 iPad Air. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty and everything I've discussed in this video, I still think that the 2019 iPad Air is the better choice, especially if you're looking for longevity in your products, which I think is a key factor in purchasing anything technology-wise. However, even after considering everything I've said about the 2019 iPad Air being a better buy than the 10.5-inch iPad Pro, you may still be wondering about pricing, because you can find the 10.5-inch iPad Pro for severely discounted prices at many retailers worldwide, and even for even further discounted prices when it comes to second-hand devices. However, before you start rummaging around trying to find the best deals on an older 10.5-inch iPad Pro, consider this. In some regions around the world, back to school season is in full swing. Make sure to check if your country is eligible for these sorts of discounts, as in the United States and Great Britain, as far as I know, Apple has a really good promotion going on right now. In regions that apply, if you order a 2019 iPad Pro directly through Apple's education store, on top of the $479 student discounted base price of the 64GB 2019 iPad Air, you also get a free pair of Beats Solo 3 over-ear headphones. Now, even though the sound quality of Beats over-ear headphones are questionable at best, there are people who are willing to pay a premium for Beats products just because of the brand name. What this means is that you can further reduce the $479 base price of the iPad Air by selling the Beats headphones for around $150 or so. So that means that you can get a brand new iPad Air for just over $300, which is a massive steal if you consider the amount of features that you're going to get. What's even better is that if you sell the Beats headphones, you can buy a first generation Apple Pencil and a really good quality case to go along with the 2019 iPad Air for extra productivity at no real extra cost to the base $479 price tag. If you're watching this video from, say, Australia or New Zealand, these savings and promotions don't apply because right now it isn't back to school season for us, but in January, February, or even December, these savings do apply, and there are similar promotions that go on in Australia and New Zealand. So don't worry if you're missing out at this current point in time. There will be a chance for you to pick up a heavily discounted iPad Air when the time comes. So that is it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If I helped you in some capacity, make sure to give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe for more tech content. If you have any questions, make sure to leave those in the comments down below, and I'm happy to answer them as soon as I can. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.